Okay, this hearing will come to order. I want to welcome everybody to the Budget Committee's hearing on the President's Fiscal Year 2027 budget request. And I would like, on behalf of my colleagues, to welcome our guest, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, the Honorable Russell Vought, to the committee. We appreciate your time and look forward to your remarks. It's important, Director, to hear the President's vision and priorities for resourcing the people's government to provide for the common defense. It's important to hear about the President's vision and priorities for stewarding the people's treasure to promote the general welfare of the public. And it's important to hear the President's vision and priority for resourcing the government to protect and preserve our children's future and to secure the blessings of liberty for the next generation. That's why I think this is the most important committee in the United States Congress, Russ. And that's why meetings like today and discussions and debates like today, I think, are paramount for the governing of our great nation. With that, I'm just going to jump into yielding myself such time as I may desire. Okay, no notes here, just some thoughts. We've done well to have some constructive conversation and have civil tone. Today, I suspect, will be a little more amped up. And I'm pretty amped up myself. I hope we hear honest, constructive comments and good faith debate, but I suspect we're going to hear some spin. I anticipate we'll hear some false narratives and fear-mongering, conjecture, and even flat-out misrepresentations of the truth. That's what I expect, sadly. I hope that didn't happen. But what I think is important, Director and colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, is that we put out what I believe is factual context to this conversation. Russ, I don't know of a president in my lifetime, maybe in history, but in my lifetime, that has inherited such a complete and utter mess as President Trump did in January of last year. One self-inflicted disaster after another for 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration. Utter lawlessness, incompetence, a border that was wide open, millions of people, criminals, gangs, drugs that killed a plane load of Americans effectively every week, more people dying of the drugs coming across the border than the people dying from the Vietnam War. Again, all because of the dereliction of duty to uphold the laws of this land and a failure to do the first and most important job, which is to provide for the common defense. And the American people suffered. Our resources were drained, our safety was jeopardized, and there was no rule of law, the cornerstone of any civil society. We had feckless foreign policy. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was a dumpster fire. We didn't do anything to preempt or prevent Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine. We were spending our time at the Pentagon teaching our troops a master class in pronouns in the era of transgenderism, and we were socializing our troops in radical ideology instead of preparing them to fight and win wars and to restrain evil. And the result was we had a much more unstable world. I think we were made a mockery by our enemies. And finally, We saw unbridled spending, about $7 to $8 trillion, record deficit spending. If you add in the additional cost of interest that went skyrocketing, it's about 12 trillion overall. We had a weaker economy, recessionary economy. We had a cost of living crisis that we haven't experienced as a nation in almost a half a century. We were paying people not to work. The failed policies and the spending that created this unaffordability crisis was that we were paying people not to work. Let's remember this. We were bailing out union pension funds without fixing it, bailing out schools that didn't open for our children. We waived work requirements for able-bodied adults in every welfare program, while we allowed tens of billions of dollars to be drained from these important social programs for our citizens by illegal immigrants in this country, millions of them. The list goes on. We taxed and regulated our job creators. And again, the most regressive tax in my lifetime was the 20+% increase in prices for working families. Trump comes in, you and the team, in 1 year, secure the border, stop the flow, deport criminal aliens, broker a peace deal in the Middle East, provide the greatest investment in national defense in the history of our country, pull down the drain and the drive of our deficit and looming debt crisis in mandatory spending by rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse to the tune of about $1.5 trillion, constrain spending on the discretionary side, cut taxes, cut spending at historic levels, open up domestic energy production. We had lower interest, lower inflation, a growing economy, wages are up, people putting more money in their pockets before my Democrat colleagues shut the government down over a COVID-era fraud-ridden program to expand a failed underlying policy of Obamacare. That was the first shutdown before the shutdown that we're in today. We would have been at 2.5% plus growth. We were made a mockery, derided for putting that assumption in our big, beautiful bill. But that's exactly what CBO said where we'd be. Over the 10-year budget window, that's $1.5 trillion to reduce the deficit. So there is a reason that CBO in their recent report, 6 months into this fiscal year, shows a 10% reduction in our deficit. It's been decades since we've seen that. 10% reduction in our deficit because of growth, because of rooting out waste and bending the curve on mandatory spending and controlling cost and cutting wasteful and unnecessary spending on the discretionary budget. And because President Trump decided to lead on the world stage with respect to trade and give our workers, manufacturers, and farmers a head-to-head fighting chance at trade deals. And the revenue helped shore up our balance sheet. So I'm pleased with what the president has done. I'm proud he's our commander-in-chief. I'm going to hear and think we'll hear a lot about a war of choice. Let me tell you something. It's a choice to play patty cake and have a policy of appeasement with a jihadist, genocidal, radical terrorist regime to the point that they are knocking on the door of having a nuclear weapon. And that is what we've seen, not just from our Democrat colleagues or Democrat presidents, but for almost 50 years. So yes, we choose to defend our country's interest and protect our homeland and the American people from serious and imminent threats. And I've said before, I pray to God that whether it's a Democrat or Republican in the Oval Office, when they get those briefings, they're willing to put politics and personal interests aside and do what's right for the country. It's not easy. It won't be easy. But it never is easy to do the right thing in this town, Russ. So thanks for being here. That's the context. I think this budget of yours shows directionally that we're going to continue to do that and double down on it, right? Reduce wasteful spending, invest in our defense, and continue to promote the growth that we so desperately need. And all boats will rise on that prosperity. With that, I yield time to my colleague and ranking member, Mr. Brendan Boyle.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. OMB Director. I didn't know how shy you were until the last 15 months when you weren't before our committee, but do appreciate you taking the time today. You know how bad this economy is when we hear Joe Biden being invoked, we hear trans people being invoked. I was waiting for Jimmy Carter to be blamed next, but apparently we didn't get quite there. Let me just do a reset and present to you a set of facts, a set of data. Right now, according to opinion polls, the approval of the economy of the American people is at its lowest level since 2008, the Great Recession. 29%. An average of the last three polls shows 30% approval. Disapproval over approval of this administration's handling of the economy, more than 2-to-1, disapproval over approval. The Michigan consumer data, consumer confidence level, the lowest level ever recorded, even lower during COVID, even lower during the Great Recession, or even lower than during the Great Recession. If you look at the job creation over the last 15 months, there's one thing missing, and that's job creation. We have been in a jobless economy over the last 15 months. Inflation, which actually, even though there's no question, we had an inflation crisis, not just in the United States, but all throughout the world after the COVID pandemic in 2022, after the pandemic had ended. Every single month in 2024, inflation dropped over the preceding month. What happened around April of last year? Liberation Day? Inflation was liberated. You saw inflation begin to increase, and every single month we've seen inflation increase. And gas prices. Yesterday, I was in Northeast Philly, where I'm from and where I live, a working class part of the city of Philadelphia. Was in front of a gas station. The gas at that particular location was $4.11, which is slightly lower than the average nationally and in the United States of about $4.15 a gallon. 6 weeks ago, that same gas station was under $3 a gallon. We've seen over the last month the largest increase in gas prices in my lifetime, in the lifetime of most people here. What's different about this economy, unlike the inflation crisis after the pandemic, unlike the Great Recession, unlike the recession of 2001, unlike the recession of 1992, the economic downturn that we're experiencing, no jobs, record inflation, gas prices through the roof, consumer confidence plummeting, all of this is directly related to the policies of the Trump administration that you carry out, Mr. Vought. None of those previous examples that I cited, none of them could be directly attributed to the policies of the president at that time. We can debate about certain things that did influence them, particularly going into the 2008 recession. But with this president, the change is so abrupt. The fact inflation was dropping month over month. The fact that we had an incredible jobs economy until it was lost a year and a half ago. You know, I'm from Pennsylvania, the biggest battleground state in the nation, also the nation's birthplace, which we're making a big to-do about this year in 2026 and celebrating our semi-quincentennial. But Pennsylvania is really known over the last decade in our politics as the nation's biggest battleground state. So as a result, basically every day in 2024 in the fall, we had either Donald Trump or the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris, in our state. Donald Trump had, I have to say, a brilliant campaign slogan. Said, your prices are too high. I will lower them, and I quote him, I will lower them on day one. Well, here we are about day 450. He hasn't lowered anything. The only thing he's lowered is his approval rating on the economy. He has lowered that. Donald Trump and this administration have failed miserably on this economy. They failed to bring prices down, and in fact, they made the situation worse. With that, we have a lot of questions on this side since it's been 15 months. You're the first OMB director ever to not appear before this committee last year. I appreciate you at least today taking the time. We have a lot of questions, and I certainly hope after today, if we send to you questions in writing, that you would respond finally, as you've ignored all of our previous requests. It's a matter of basic respect for the Congress of the United States and for this committee. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. In the interest of time, if any other member has an opening statement, I ask you to submit it for the record. We'll hold the record open to the end of the day to accommodate those members who may not have prepared written statements. Now, I'd like to recognize Director Vought. I want to again thank him for his time. Committee, Mr. Vought has received your written statements. It will be made part of the formal record. You now have 5 minutes for your remarks.
Ranking Member Boyle, members of the committee, thank you for having me here to testify on the President's budget request for fiscal year 27. I look forward to a productive conversation on how to continue the fiscal progress we've made so far. When President Trump took office, the nation was facing financial catastrophe under the failed leadership of the Biden administration, and decades of status quo spending strangling our nation. Those decades produced nothing in the area of fiscal restraint. A lot of talk about the program and the problems, but utter futility about doing anything about it. That fiscal futility has ended with the return of President Trump. In just 1 year, the Trump administration and Congress have made historic progress on righting our fiscal ship, the speed and scope of which have not been seen in Washington for many years. The President drove enactment of the Working Families Tax Cut Act, which is a once-in-a-generation legislation to end fiscal futility, invest in critical priorities, and cut taxes for working Americans. This bill bent the cost of—
Mr. Vought, just hold on for a second. The chair notes a disruption in the hearing and requests that the Capitol Police restore order immediately. The committee will briefly take a recess until we restore order. Shut the door, please. Mr. Vought, please resume.
This bill bent the cost curve for federal spending, achieving nearly $2 trillion in mandatory savings while securing historic investments in our nation's defense and the Department of Homeland Security without corresponding increases in objectionable non-defense spending. The President also shepherded legislation through Congress that rescinded $9 billion in wasteful and weaponized
Mr.
spending.
Vogt, back up, start again where you left off. We're going to wait until these folks move down. I can't hear anything, and we're not going to let them disrupt this hearing. As the ranking member said, we have some serious business to do. I certainly don't think that these guys condone this disruption. This is not the way this committee works, never has. Since I've been here, I don't think it's going to work that way either side. So let's move those guys.
It's just, if you don't mind, Jody, in the 3 years and 3 months since Jody's been chair and I've been ranking member, I think this is the first we've had of this. It's a very serious issue, so I understand why they're passionate. But we have actually, unlike other congressional committees that really do devolve into the, partisan food fight, this committee has conducted its business with seriousness and purpose, and I hope for the next 3 hours we can be true to that, as we have been for the last 3 years and 3 months.
Thank you. Thank you. Well said. Okay, I think we're in a better spot. Speak loudly into the mic, and let's proceed.
The President also shepherded legislation through Congress that rescinded $9 billion in wasteful and weaponized spending, which was the first standalone rescissions package enacted by Congress since 1992. He canceled $3 billion in excessive spending that was wrongly designated as an emergency by the Congress and executed a historic pocket rescission to eliminate $5 billion in wasteful foreign aid. Upon signing this year's appropriations bills, President Trump continued to bring discretionary spending under control. The full 2026 appropriations bills enacted the first real spending cut in over a decade to discretionary spending. It rooted out wasteful spending that the administration identified across federal agencies. The enacted bills reaffirm administration policies to eliminate ineffective federal agencies that do not serve a useful purpose. For example, the bills eliminated all programming for USAID as the administration works to fully shut down the agency after decades of mismanagement and abuse. This also included the complete elimination of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funneled billions of taxpayer dollars into biased and woke program at NPR and PBS. We look forward to working with you to achieve even more progress in the next appropriation cycle. This budget builds on the President's vision by continuing to constrain non-defense spending and reform the federal government. The budget proposes a 10% cut to non-defense compared to 2026 levels. Within this total, the budget maintains investment in border security and immigration enforcement. It delivers on the President's commitment to support law enforcement and combat violent crime with a 13% increase to the Department of Justice, and honors the nation's sacred obligation to our military veterans. In addition, this 2027 budget eliminates wasteful Green New Deal projects that are dependent on foreign supply chains, returns control of education back to American families, and roots out waste, fraud, and abuse in programs both at home and abroad, ensuring that every taxpayer dollar makes Americans safer, stronger, and more prosperous. The budget simultaneously builds upon the historic $1 trillion fiscal year 26 defense top line by requesting $1.5 trillion for 2027, a 42% increase as promised by President Trump last year. The 2027 budget will ensure that the United States continues to maintain the world's most powerful and capable military as we grapple with an increasingly dangerous world. It is a sizable increase, and I want to explain that. It is meant for significant paradigm-shifting investments. For instance, the President and his Department of War are exhibiting tremendous leadership to build ships, planes, drones, munitions, and satellites faster without the backlog of status quo. For the industrial base to double or triple and build more facilities, not just add shifts, it requires multi-year agreements to purchase into the future. That cost has to be booked in this first year. Under President Trump's bold leadership, every tool in the executive fiscal toolbox has been used to achieve real savings, and our administration will continue to do so. A historic paradigm shift in the budget process is occurring, and it is producing real results for the American people. Fiscal futility is over. Now that our fiscal ship has finally turned and is facing the right direction, I look forward to working with you to continue to move it forward. We have much work to do. Together, we will achieve significant savings while implementing the President's bold vision.
I thank the gentleman, Director Vought, and we'll now move to Q&A, and I will yield myself 5 minutes. So, Director Vought, you heard my ranking member put forward some economic metrics to compare and contrast 4 years of Biden-Harris and the first year of the Trump administration. The average inflation rate, it got as high as 9%, but the average was 5%. The average inflation rate during President Trump's first year, and it went down 2.7%. The gas prices under Biden-Harris were $5. It also went down. We expect a bump up in that for a time being, but we expect it to go back down. But in terms of comparing and contrasting the measures of economic success and the things that would have driven the affordability crisis in this country, speak to that from your perspective. Again, what drove those things, where we were then, where we are now, 1 year into this administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honestly astounded that the Democrats would make an issue of inflation when they had 9% inflation under the Biden administration. We hadn't seen anything in nearly a generation. And when we left office, you and I, Mr. Chairman, were having trouble reminding the political class, the economic class, the policy community that inflation could be a problem again. And when the Biden administration began to pass the COVID packages and the Inflation Reduction Act, of course, which weren't anything but, and to spend at a level that we haven't seen in a very long time, it was me and Larry Summers, a Democrat, that were saying we are going to see inflation skyrocket, and in fact, we did. It was not because of supply chains or economic shocks. It was because of spending was dramatically increased at a time where there was no need for it at that time. The important rescue measures had already occurred and ensured that we didn't have any kind of deflationary spiral in the midst of COVID. It was because of spending. And so this administration has come into the economic disaster, which was the Biden administration, and gotten costs lower. It has ensured that we have fiscal progress so that the era of big spending is over. Like I've said, we have the end of fiscal futility. I look around at many of the pictures of the chairman who have labored to work at getting the cost curve down, most of them unsuccessful. This particular budget committee has not. They have been successful in conjunction with the President of the United States. I hope that continues. We're in the midst of passing we passed the extension of the President's tax cuts. Many of those were aimed at working class individuals. They're now going through their first season of seeing what changes that will make on their bottom line, and I think that's going to lead to an explosion in affordability for the American people. This side of the aisle would have said, we're not going to extend those tax cuts, and that would have led to an economic depression. The notion that you're going to raise people's taxes by 30 and 40% and not impact the economy is simply not true. And it's a dishonest debate to be able to say that one side didn't want to extend tax cuts and cause the inflation is somehow going to be a better steward of economic gain and growth in this country than the one that is existing in the White House right now under President Trump's effective leadership.
So we stop the reckless spending. We bend the curve on the fraud that is sapping these entitlement programs and safety nets for those who need them the most. What you will hear and what I've heard now for as long as I've been in this position, at least over the years or the last year since the president has been in the Oval Office, and certainly during the big, beautiful bill debates, was that we were cutting much needed programs for vulnerable American citizens. But the CBO, the nonpartisan CBO, put out a missive that outlined the people, the millions of people who were ineligible or illegal or who were healthy, able-bodied adults refusing to work, again, that were draining the social safety nets and the tax dollar and hard-earned treasure of the American people. Any comment on just the waste and fraud focus, and then I'll move on to the ranking member's question.
I mean, it was historic welfare reform that the Congress passed and the president signed into law. Just to give people a reminder historically, you had President Clinton sign into law welfare reform with a Republican Congress. Those historic reforms, which led people to get off of welfare, experience the dignity of work, led to lower caseloads with one program, TANF, cash assistance, was then added to Medicaid and to food stamps, historic reforms. And we're going to see the benefit of that with people getting back to work. Remember, this is the able-bodied population within Medicaid. This is not those that can't work. This is the able-bodied population in Medicaid that can work. And it will lead to people that were ineligible for Medicaid previously and subject to fraud no longer being on the books. There were substantial reforms made to ensure that states tighten their roles and we get back in the business of having a social safety net that we can afford and is thriving for the American people.
Thank you, Director Vought. Okay, I'm going to give my ranking member some extra time because I know I went over, and then I'm going to be, unusually disciplined on the clock. But you get some extra time, just in fairness. Okay, so your Q&A for 5 minutes plus.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to, there are a lot of areas I would like to get to, but between me and my colleagues, at least on this side of the dais, I think we'll get to them all. Let me start by reminding people back 9 months ago what President Trump called at the time, though he wants to rebrand it and never talks about it now, his one big beautiful bill, though it has been known by many other names. That piece of legislation, despite your rhetoric about this budget committee succeeding on deficit and debt, according to the Congressional Budget Office, as well as other nonpartisan groups, both left of center and right of center, have said that single piece of legislation adds more to our deficit and debt than any other piece of legislation passed by Congress in American history. In addition to the over $4 trillion it adds to our national debt, it eliminates health care coverage for more than 15 million Americans, according to the CBO. The Kaiser Family Foundation says there's actually more than 17 million Americans who will lose their health care. Are they really all, according to you? Really? You're going to sit here with a straight face and say they're all illegals, they were all defrauding the system? That's actually your position?
Yes. With regard to the people that have lost that.
I mean, that's laughable. I'm sorry, I'll give you a chance to respond.
You had a number of issues with regard to your comments there.
Wait, let me
Number one.
Sorry, wait, reclaiming my time. I just want to be clear. I'm citing, we acknowledge, the CBO figure. That's where I'm getting the 15 million from, and the Kaiser Family Foundation says 17 million. You're saying None of them are legitimately on this, even though we had one of them actually testify before us
I
at
didn't
this
say
committee.
all of them are illegals. I said there's also the benefit of people returning to the workforce because they are able-bodied individuals, or they should not have been on the system regardless because of the inability to address fraud in the aftermath of the
Okay, so they're all either illegals or defrauding the system.
Well, that's certainly not a provocative statement that we have fraud all over the country, is it, Mr. Ranking Member?
Why I imagine there are fraud in all sorts of private and public sector areas, but the idea that 15 million Americans are about to lose their health care, the single biggest loss of health care in American history, mind you, not even during the Great Depression did 15 million Americans lose their health care coverage. The idea that all of those people who are about to lose their health care are defrauding the system or are illegal immigrants, that is not supported by any facts whatsoever.
Are now working and getting the benefit of a job with employer-sponsored health care coverage. Look, these assessments by CBO and others are often very static.
It's right of center groups as well. Reclaim my time. I only have a few minutes, so excuse me. But it's not just CBO. I mean, right of center groups, left of center groups, nonpartisan groups. You're saying they're all wrong.
I am saying that the budget community typically relies on static thinking, static scoring, current law baselines, and so you don't get an accurate picture of the extent to which the reforms that are being made are going to have a dynamic impact with better programs, more health care. For instance, $50 billion.
Well, let me, before you get to the friends, I only have a couple minutes, so let me actually transition to my next subject, because I think I'll only have time now for this. The president recently said, I mean, he was talking about the record increase in gas prices thanks to him and his war of choice in Iran, but he diverted in a spontaneous, he's speaking extemporaneously in the White House just a few days ago. He said, and I quote, "The United States can't take care of daycare. That has to be up to a state." He then added, Medicaid, Medicare, all these individual things, they can do it on a state basis. You can't do it on federal. So I'm just curious, from your perspective at OMB, have you taken any actions to turn Medicare back to the states?
No, and the president doesn't want to do that with regard to these important federal programs.
I mean, he said it.
So
you're disagreeing with what the president said?
No, I'm saying that the president he's talking about fraud in these programs. He
didn't mention, excuse me, reclaim my time. Nowhere, I have the full statement in front of me. Nowhere in front of me is the word fraud presented. What he was talking about, he later at a different part said, we have to pay more for wars, and instead we can't afford Medicaid, Medicare, childcare, things like that. And looking at the budget proposal, this is why I raise it, $442 billion, correct me if I'm wrong, $442 billion increase in defense. That's what you're asking for, about a 42% increase, is that right?
Correct. For many paradigm-shifting investments that we need this.
A 42% increase on what was already a record high for defense. And look, I serve as part of our U.S. delegation to the NATO Parliament. I am no pacifist. I believe in a strong national defense. I believe the United States, I believe the world is at its best when the United States is the strongest military. The idea that we're going to pay for a 42% increase in this military, in this Department of Defense, and at the same time cut Medicaid, Medicare, not pay for childcare, all of these things that the American people need, in the case of Medicare, have paid into, that is a reflection of priorities that are out of whack. And I see I've gone over my time. I appreciate your indulgence. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Without objection, I'd like to submit for the record this letter from CBO that confirms, in fact, that the One Big Beautiful Bill and the coverage impacts that have been discussed here, that those millions of people that were mentioned were either ineligible for the program, illegal immigrants, or they were able-bodied adults who refused to work. And then I'm going to submit this, which is CBO's final analysis that confirmed the same thing. So without objection.
I'm not going to object to the submission of the letter. I do object, though, to your characterization of the letter. Everyone should read the letter.
Absolutely.
But nowhere has it been found by anybody that the 15 million Americans about to lose their health care are all illegal immigrants or defrauding the system.
We'll bring it up when we have the next CBO oversight hearing, and we'll go through that letter in great detail along with the facts that support it. With that, I'm going to yield to the vice chairman of the committee, Lloyd Smucker, for 5 minutes, then Lloyd Doggett, Tom McClintock, Bobby Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director, for being here with us. The ranking member mentioned he's from Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania as well. And I've talked to my constituents about how they feel or what they're experiencing under the policies of the Big Beautiful Bill, under the policies of your office and of the president, compared to what they were experiencing under the Biden administration. I can tell you that I am willing any day to put our record up against what they experienced during the Biden years. And I just want to remind listeners of what happened. 9% inflation, an average of 5%, meant that, and wages not keeping up, meant that working families literally lost about a month's worth of the entire year of spending power. And so they really felt it when they went to the grocery store. They filled their tanks with gas. It just simply had become unaffordable for them. And what I'm really proud of under the policies that we've advanced with your help is that we are now in a period of time when wage growth is outpacing the increase in costs of goods. And so this started, I think, back in June. Maybe you could clarify that for me. But over time, people are feeling like they're in a better position due to the policies of this administration. And I want to remind, it's April 15th. People are seeing the impact of the tax bill that we had done. And so it's maybe appropriate that you're here on this day, because I think we can be very proud of the assistance and the help that we've given to working families all across America. I want to remind members here that 20 million Americans took advantage of the no tax on overtime. A very important policy to folks in my district and the districts of everybody here. And I want to remind folks that Democrats voted against that policy. Millions of Americans took advantage of the no tax on tip. I can talk to a lot of them who are very grateful that they're able to keep more of their hard-earned dollars. Every Democrat here voted against that policy. We effectively eliminated taxes on 88% of those who are receiving Social Security. Every Democrat here voted against that policy. And in fact, we prevented what would have been the largest increase on middle-income Americans when we passed the One Big Beautiful Bill. And every Democrat here voted against that policy. The Republican Party, through that bill and other things that we've done under this administration, is the party that is working to improve the lives of working Americans all across the country. They're feeling better because of that, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done. To the questions that the ranking member had asked regarding the individuals on Medicaid or health care who he alleges will lose their health care coverage, we put in place provisions that prevented illegal immigrants from accessing taxpayer dollars. Democrats voted against that. They don't care that some of those, and I don't know the number, literally are individuals who are here illegally in the U.S. and taking hard-earned taxpayer dollars for their benefit. Democrats don't care about that. They voted against that. They don't seem to care that our policies have moved people from relying on government policies, and they've entered the workforce and have probably better health care through their employers, which is a significant portion of their job. They don't care about that. They literally don't care about that. They voted against every one of these policies that are helping working Americans. And then and I'm taking a lot of my time, but in regards to adding to the debt, because I know you care about the debt, I care a lot about the debt. We've talked about moving to 3% deficit to GDP within the hopefully not too distant future. We've made progress on that, and this is the point I just wanted you to address briefly. Our deficit this year, last year, was lower than the year before for the first time in a long time due to the policies of the bill that we passed. And we're having increased federal revenue. I wonder if you would just very briefly talk about that. How could we pass a bill that literally keeps taxes low for Americans, but yet we're seeing increased federal revenue?
Gentleman's time's expired. Brief response, and then we're going to go to Mr. Doggett.
This is a phenomena that our side tends to make often, that when you continue to have good tax policy, revenues are going to go up. And revenues, we expect to be higher than their historical average with the extension of the tax cuts that was done with the One Big Beautiful Bill. We use multiple names for them. The president, as recently as 2 days ago, referred to as the One Big Beautiful Bill. We are trying to get the word out to the American people. Congress did so much in that bill, so much that helps the American people. We want to explain that working family tax cut at every opportunity that we possibly can so that they're aware of what they're going to see in their tax returns.
I yield 5 minutes to my friend from Texas, Mr. Lloyd Doggett.
Thank you. Under your direction, Mr. Vought, at the National Institutes of Health, last year grants for Alzheimer's and aging research were cut almost 50%. Mental health, 47%. New grants for cancer research, 23%. And as I read the budget that you're here presenting today, the Trump regime's response is that medical research has not yet been cut sufficiently. Doesn't your budget propose another 12% cut at the National Institutes of Health?
Most of what you said is untrue. NIH was not cut at all last year. We proposed a series of reforms to lower the cost. We continue, although not as much, to lower the cost this year.
Reclaiming my time, my question to you is, don't you propose to cut the National Institutes of Health by another 12%?
We propose to have a cut to the National Institute of Health.
Thank you, sir.
That
Reclaiming my
that
time.
goes after specific programs.
Yes, sir.
And,
Thank you.
and
Reclaiming my
institutes like
time.
the Minority
Let's talk
Health
about your
Disparity Institute.
Reclaiming
like the
my time,
Fogarty Center.
Mr. Chairman. If the gentleman will please yield, he can filibuster when he's in the Senate.
Gentleman
What
reclaims
we
his
do
time.
know, as far as the truth, is that there were fewer grants for new cases last year at NIH than at any time in the last 30 years. Is it your feeling in proposing further cuts at NIH that there are just not enough worthwhile projects out there, or that we cannot afford to invest more in doing something about Alzheimer's, cancer, Parkinson's, HIV, other dread concerns?
There are many worthy health investments out there. I think post-COVID, for an institution that contributed to the pandemic itself with the funding of gain-of-function research, to give that institute $42 trillion, which is more than it got under the COVID pandemic, the kinds of is very generous. The kinds of things that we're trying to do with the National Institute of Health, indirect cost rates. We don't think when Bill Gates gives 10%
Yes, sir.
for parkings and administrative
Reclaiming
costs
my time, Mr.
and
Chairman.
buildings, that should go.
Reclaiming my
reclaims his
time.
time.
After giving last year fewer grants than at any time in the last 30 years, you are proposing further cuts there. And of course, the cuts are not only to medical research, but is it correct that in your budget you would cut the National Science Foundation, which has in the past provided grants that helped on artificial intelligence, on laser eye surgery, on MRI technology, among others, that you propose to cut it by 55%?
We have a sizable cut to National
Yes, sir.
Science Foundation.
Over half of the funding.
But
of
it
the
will
National
not
Science
impact our investments on artificial
Well, that's good to
intelligence,
know, because
quantum physics.
you may be the only person, along with President Trump, who believe that. Reading from the director of a consortium of research universities, he says your budget cuts are the equivalent of working in a company that feels like it's on the verge of bankruptcy. Another one says slow scientific progress threatening the nation's position in the world economy. And that's one of my concerns, because when you eliminate these research budgets, you impact long-term economic growth. Are you aware that one international organization has recently said already the United States has fallen behind China when it comes to research?
We have no doubt in our mind that we are going to still be the leading innovator, funder of research, both private and public. Our view is that we want to make sure that there's a dollar that's actually well
Yes, sir.
spent on research.
Thank you
and not
very much.
blown.
I'll accept that as you're disagreeing with the international organization that says we've already fallen behind China. Do you agree that the impact of federal research dollars helps to stimulate private investment? In fact, one estimate is every federal dollar generating 8 times as much in private investment on research.
Mr. Congressman, I don't think the Fogarty International Center, which is at the NIH, should spend $224,000 for a survey on how Buddhism creates HIV stigma in Thailand. That's what your hard-earned tax dollars is going to fund under the guise of research investment. I don't think $20,000 should go to a value ship.
That's fine, Mr. Vogt. Thank you. It's fine that you go through and eliminate any project like that, but that doesn't justify providing the fewest number of grants for these key dread diseases in 30 years. I want to ask you about the comment that was referred to by President Trump about the fact that we can't afford daycare at the federal level. And of course, your budget provides no increase in funding for child care, does it?
We flat fund childcare, which you would not get
And you
from the
also
question that you
eliminate
asked.
the program, do you not, that provides assistance for some people with heating and air conditioning, the LIHEAP program. You terminate that entirely.
It is a historically fraudulent program.
Do you terminate it entirely or not?
We do not have funding for LIHIP because
Yes,
we
sir.
believe in the moment where we are fighting fraud.
Of all the many things the president says he wants to cut, you have not gotten to Medicare in this budget yet.
We
I guess
don't
that
think
will be the
LIHEAP-
next one.
We don't think
That's
LIHEAP
coming up
funds-
next is Medicare because, as the president said, that's a state function. Well, many of us believe it's a vital program to protect the health of our people. We don't want to see what happened to it. What happened to Medicaid already and to the Affordable Care Act happens to Medicare, and that's very much what's at stake here. I yield back.
Can I address that, Mr. Chairman?
30
quickly.
seconds.
We do not believe that LIHEAP should go to incarcerated individuals and dead people. It is a notoriously fraudulent program by the same experts that the ranking member continues to cite on a number of other issues.
Well, I'm sure the dead people argument applies just about as much as it did to President Trump's claim that people that were
gentleman's time
350
has
years
expired.
old were getting Social Security. It's
Gentleman's-
all phony.
My friend from Texas, time has expired. Gave the gentleman an opportunity to answer your question and respond. Mr. Tom McClintock, you have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I were the ranking member, I'd be very careful about reproaching this administration on inflation. We need to remember every dollar that you had the day that Biden and the Democrats took power was worth only 79 cents the day they left office. Compare that to Trump's first term. Every dollar when he took office was still worth 92.5 cents when he left office. And since he's returned to office, a dollar on Inauguration Day is still worth 97 cents today. That's still too much inflation, but it's a fraction of what we suffered because of the spending spree that the Democrats unleashed and that produced the worst inflation that Americans have suffered in 40 years. He's correct that gas prices have increased to more than $4 a gallon nationally as a result of the international supply disruption, but that's brief and temporary. If the ranking member is concerned about long-term gas prices, I invite him to come to California, where the Democrats' war on fossil fuels has caused the highest gas prices in the United States. It was $6.19 a gallon yesterday in Sacramento. And that's a long-term problem caused by the very policies that his colleagues advocate nationally. Mr. Vought, I don't need to lecture you about the precarious condition of our nation's finances, and I believe the domestic reforms that you're proposing are an essential element in restoring fiscal responsibility. But I take a very different view of grants and subsidies than Mr. Doggett. In my view, grants and subsidies are the root of all fiscal evil, specifically grants to politically connected organizations where there's little oversight or accountability, grants to pay for local projects that benefit one community at the expense of another. If the federal government needs a good or service it can't produce itself, it ought to send out an RFP, award a contract to the lowest responsible bidder, and then hold that bidder accountable to the terms of the contract. Subsidies cost us hundreds of billions of dollars. They substitute the consumer judgment with the judgment of politicians, which both reduces the quality of life of Americans and the overall prosperity of our country, and again, goes to well-connected business interests. How do you see things, and how does your budget rein in this waste?
Thank you, Congressman. This is one of the areas where we've really tried to tighten how federal dollars are spent, looking at NGOs that are the ones that are sending this money out the door. Many of our concerns on the foreign aid was because they were going through NGOs that don't share this administration's perspective on a host of issues. And we are very concerned with regard to nonprofits that are in receipt of these grant programs and have a very different governing philosophy than this administration. So we're going to do everything we can. This is a $70 billion cut to non-defense discretionary. Many of these are at the grant programs that you're specifically talking about. When you're $39 trillion in debt, you can't begin to deal with the non-defense side if you're not willing to pull back on these grant programs that unfortunately, even if you were to assume that they're a dollar spent is a dollar advertised, when you dig into it, you find that that's quite frankly not the case.
The Manhattan Institute's economists estimated that just in California, $180 billion has been lost to fraud just during the administration of Governor Gavin Newsom. Federal taxpayer dollars that were entrusted to him to manage. That's $180 billion. That's roughly $4,500 for every man, woman, and child living in California. We've seen whistleblower testimony of billions of dollars lost to Somali fraud in Minnesota, while Governor Tim Walz went after the whistleblowers. We've heard an audio tape of Minnesota Attorney General meeting with Somali fraudsters as they assured themselves that they had each other's backs. Their words. How much do you estimate is lost to fraud in these programs, and what are you proposing to do about it?
Our administration cares deeply about the fraud problem that we have in this country, particularly in many blue states across the country, as we've seen in Minnesota, that you identified in California. We've established a fraud task force with the vice president in the lead, and part of that is to remove government barriers that may be working to be able to ensure that people are prosecuted for fraud or that they don't have the resources to investigate it in these programs. We want to make sure the Department of Justice is going after fraudulent claims. We want to make sure that the agencies have that resource, and we want to get after this. We believe that fraud destroys the American people's view of government. Quite frankly, if you're on the other side of the aisle, I think it destroys people's view of what the social safety net should be. And so it's vital on a bipartisan basis that we get after the fraud in our country, and this administration is going to do it like never before.
But as we learned from the Ellison audio tape, it does enrich their supporters. Yield back.
Mr. Bobby Scott from Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you outlined the Biden administration. I want to reiterate some of the things that the ranking member said, including out of 48 months in the Biden administration, 47 of those had job growth. The only month that there was a job loss was the month that Trump had come in and actually was president for a significant part of that month. On average monthly gain in jobs, about 300,000 over the Biden administration. And that compares to 5 months of job loss already run up by this administration, 5 months of job loss, and an aggregate total that doesn't even amount to 1 month's average month of job growth in the Biden administration. I heard the chairman mention bailing out pension funds. I think he's referring to the fact that in the American Rescue Plan, we saved 1 million people's pensions. They were losing their pensions, wasn't their fault, but they were about to lose their pensions, and we saved those pension plans and pensions in the American Rescue Plan Act, and I think that was a good thing. If you ask those who are about to retire whether they thought it was a good thing, I think most would agree. On inflation, the ranking member pointed out that we had global inflation under Biden. The American Rescue Plan Act and the other spending, I think most experts said, added a little bit of marginal inflation, but the spending also included in the American Rescue Plan Act for families of four, about $5,000 in stimulus checks, $6,000 in child tax credits. Many received enhanced SNAP benefits and lower Obamacare premiums. And the question of whether it worked, if you looked at the end of the year, credit card delinquencies were the lowest in 30 years. Child poverty dropped 40%. So I think it worked. And inflation under Trump, as the ranking member has pointed out, specific policies like tariffs, inflation, and the war have added to inflation. And as far as 15 million losing their health care is a good thing because they might be getting jobs. All of the information that we've received from states that have imposed work requirements on Medicaid and SNAP have found virtually no increase in jobs. So if you have, Mr. Vought, any evidence that people will get jobs as a result of that, other than just people losing their health care, would like to see it. Now, and the CBO estimates that you said the bill had a lot of different names. Big Ugly Bill is one of the names we like to call it. With interest, that's going to add about $4 trillion to the debt. What is your estimate of the damage done to the fiscal situation by that bill?
It will reduce the deficit by $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years if you account for the right baseline, Congressman.
Okay, so everybody thinks it's going to add about $4 trillion to the debt, and you think it's going to save money. Eisenhower was the last Republican president to leave to Democrats a lower deficit measured by a percentage of GDP, which is a normal measurement, a lower deficit than they inherited. Does this administration plan to leave a lower deficit than the one they inherited? And if so, are tax increases part of that plan?
The fiscal situation was very steep when we inherited, and what we inherited from the Biden administration. We're doing everything we possibly can. I think the things that we did this year collectively with the Congress, as I've said, is the end of fiscal futility. For 20, 30 years, and you all know that I'm a budget person, worked on the budget committee as a staffer for members. I know this place well. There was no success. A lot of people talked about the issue. It
was a simple question. Do you plan to leave a better deficit than you inherited?
This is intentionally a discretionary budget proposal. We don't give you what our deficits long-term are.
Let me ask another question. What does the budget assume for the future of the Department of Education, especially the Office of Civil Rights, if Congress fails to vote to abolish the department?
Well, as you know, in this budget, we both reflect the fact that we're trying to close the Department of Education, but that substantial resources will continue to flow to communities for education. There's only a 2% reduction in this budget for that particular department. And what's interesting about the bill that thankfully you all voted for is that you voted to endorse many of the restructurings that we did. You voted to eliminate USAID. You voted not to have Corporation for Public Broadcasting when you voted for that omnibus bills, those bills that worked its way through. And so our belief is that we make as progress on the ground with these agencies, Department of Education included, with interagency agreements to transfer work where we think that can be better done, that we're going to make the case to Congress in a way that affirms and enacts those reforms long term.
The gentleman's time has expired. You mentioned me, Mr. Scott. The jobs essentially and virtually were 100% government jobs. I could create as many government jobs as you want if we just spend a bunch of money. The second piece was the Butch-Lewis Act, essentially. Look, we had to do something, you're right, for these retirees, but we needed to do it and fix the structural problem so then we didn't end up where we were in the first place. And so my criticism is it was a bailout because there weren't policy reforms to prevent us from being back in that same situation.
I work with you on making some policy changes to make sure it doesn't happen.
You got it. Thank you. Yielding 5 minutes now to my colleague from the Hoosier State, Mr. Stutzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director, thank you for being here today. I want to touch on a couple things, but I want to give you plenty of time to give us some answers specifically to something that you said, that the era of big spending is over. Hopefully that's for good, but I appreciate what this administration has done, and then also tariff policies. But since it is tax day today, I do want to point out that the big beautiful bill has made a huge impact for Hoosiers. This year, the average Hoosier is seeing a tax cut of $3,037. I mean, that is real money in their pockets. Eliminating the death tax, it's huge for farmers. It protects over 2 million families from a tax penalty for passing their farm to the next generation. The no tax on auto loan interest is huge for Indiana and the Auto Belt. That's just a couple of things. Of course, no tax on tips, which we talk a lot about. No tax on overtime. It is an incentive for over 80 million hourly workers to keep more of their hard-earned money in their own pocket. And so thank you for your leadership and what you're doing on that. I do want to just point out real quick, the folks that were in here earlier that were talking about PEPFAR, only about 40% of PEPFAR funds supported actual service delivery, including medications, testing, commodities, and on. With the remaining 6% wasted on duplicative administrative costs, unwieldy supply chains, and layers of endless bureaucracy. In the last administration, under the Biden administration, PEPFAR funded health workers who performed over 21 abortions in Mozambique. They are promoting reproductive health education and access to birth control and other harmful programs couched under family planning in Ghana. So thank you for what you've been doing in eliminating wasteful spending. So talking about wasteful spending, people at home are trying to make ends meet. And with the big, beautiful bill and the cuts in spending, we're putting more money back in their pocket. But it's the policies of the past that have driven insurance costs up. It has driven utility prices up. Inflation has been a tax on the American people. And what the big, beautiful bill and what you're doing with the administration is bringing those costs down. Can you talk a little bit about tariff policy broadly and how we should look at that? And then also you talked of the end of big spending and where we're saving dollars for the American taxpayer.
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. I mean, tariff policy is a part of how we believe we need to address the fiscal situation of the country, along with spending reductions, along with savings and reforms. And I don't want to suggest that the work is over with regard to spending. We have a lot to do. I'm a balanced budget guy. This administration is typically always putting forward budgets that are getting to balance over some period of time. That is important work. And my point is, though, to draw attention to the fact that you can talk about the problem for a long time, but if you don't actually make progress in that direction, you haven't done anything. And I think that is what we've tried to really emphasize. Tariffs are a part of that fiscal picture. So, we believe there will be trillions that come in from tariffs. We've seen that in the first year. We don't believe the Supreme Court's decision will impact that much at all. We had a backup plan to allow us to keep in those trillions of dollars from tariffs that are contributing to our fiscal picture, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $4.7 trillion of new America First tariffs that this fiscal picture is now able to assume. And as a result, along with the spending reductions in the One Big Beautiful Bill, the trajectory from the non-defense side of what you all were able to vote on to end, or hopefully soon end, this fiscal year, we came into office with $32 trillion staring us in deficits. We've got that down in 1 year to $18 trillion. I think I'll probably hear a theme, which is we have a lot of work to go, but we've gotten a lot of work done, and we will continue to do that work as evidenced by this budget with savings and reforms wherever we can find them.
Yeah, thank you. Well, in the long run, I would love to see us move away from income taxes, especially since today's April 15th. I know there's a lot of discussion around tariffs on our side on how they affect the American people, but I think that it balances and it levels a playing field, especially with China and competition. I come from a manufacturing district, and how they can, pay low labor costs. Their utilities are subsidized. They can produce much cheaper because that's the way they play compared to us. And I think tariffs is a way to level the playing field with a country, especially like China. So thank you again for your leadership on these issues.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now yield 5 minutes to my colleague, Mr. Scott Peters from California.
Thank you. Director, thank you for being here today. The Impoundment Control Act of 1974 says that the executive cannot unilaterally withhold congressionally appropriated funds without a rescission or deferral request submitted to Congress. Director, has OMB withheld or delayed the obligation of funds appropriated by this Congress without submitting rescission or deferral notices?
We have fully complied with the Impoundment Control Act. As you probably know, we are not fans of the Impoundment Control Act. We think it's unconstitutional. The president ran against it.
Okay, but you can
However,
answer
we
the
have
question.
complied with it.
Did you withhold congressionally appropriated funds without a rescission or deferral request submitted to Congress? That's yes, right?
Not in violation of the Impoundment Control Act. We have.
Did you ever submit
We've done
rescission or
programmatic reviews of various programs
Did you ever
across the
submit
government.
rescission or deferral requests to Congress? Have you
We
submitted any?
submitted a rescissions package last year, and actually two. We continue to do programmatic reviews
To Congress?
of programs. That is not a withholding under the Impoundment Control
Did you
Act.
submit it to Congress?
We don't need to submit. If we're,
you did not.
Congressman, if we're just assessing a program for waste, fraud, and abuse.
I understand you don't think you have to, but I'm just trying to establish you did not, right? You did not,
Well,
correct?
we submitted rescissions bills to Congress last year,
Okay.
2 of them.
But not deferral notices that you were withholding?
They're not deferrals under the Impoundment Control Act.
Okay. The Government Accountability Office has already found that the administration illegally withheld nearly $8 billion in NIH grants, $7 billion for funding to support K-12 public schools nationwide, and hundreds of millions of dollars for Head Start programs across the country. Do you dispute GAO's findings?
Yes. GAO is typically wrong. They're very partisan. They are typically on the exact opposite of wherever the Trump administration is. Unfortunately, I know you all look to them. They are a branch of the legislative body. We have a very different view with regard to the merit of their opinions, and so it's not surprising to me that they have a different view on that.
Do you have a legal opinion on that?
We defend to the hilt all of our legal decisions. Most of the time, with regard to GAO, we
Have
don't
you
have
gotten
to
a
do this.
formal legal opinion on that?
Actually, most of the time, we will put out from OMB a defense in response of any of the GAO. Not always, but we try to be very forward-leaning and articulate because we feel like we have the moral and legal high ground every time we make a decision.
I'm sure you feel like you have the moral and legal high ground. I get that impression. I would just ask Mr. Chairman, for the record, that we add, without objection, if we add the decision from GAO of August 5 and July 23 on Head Start and NIH impoundment.
Without objection, so ordered.
You know, I understand that the GAO's part of the government you don't like. We don't get to decide what parts of the government we follow and we don't. We have laws that are there for a reason, and I guess we should expect that you would abide by those procedures. But you know, whether it's tariffs or the war or the way you've manipulated the budget, the administration just does not want to deal with Congress. And I have to say to my colleagues in general that we've reached a point where if something's not going well in this administration, the response is not, let's do something different. The response is, well, Biden did it worse. It is absolutely irrelevant. Joe Biden is gone. You guys won that election. We don't dispute the results of elections. You won the election. Joe Biden's gone. Our job is today, what do we do in 2026 to make things better? And this budget will not meet that 3% target that we set without aggressive growth assumptions, which I don't think we're going to see. But why are we talking about Joe Biden? Joe Biden's been gone for 2 years. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The other thing I'd suggest is, one of my colleagues, Mr. Smucker, said Democrats don't care about fraud. And I just want to just call that out a little bit, because if Mr. Smucker and I sat down together, I think we could have a discussion about fraud. I think we do care about fraud. We want to know what's real fraud and what's not real fraud. But I ask you not to question my motives. Don't say that. I will pledge to you that I will bash your policies. I think you guys are wrong. I think you're wrong, but I don't question your motives. I think everyone in this room is a patriot that wants to do the right thing for the country. And when we make each other our enemies, the Democrats versus the Republicans, this is the weakest that we can create, the weakest situation we can create for this country. When we are really not thinking of ourselves as colleagues, but as enemies who don't care about stuff, I think that's really something we should stay away from. And I think I'm sort of least worried about Mr. Smucker because he's a friend. I know him, but I hear this all the time. Let's not question each other's motives. I think you guys are really wrong on the policy. I don't think that what you're doing is good for kids. but it doesn't mean I don't think you care about kids. I just think you're wrong on the policy. And so maybe if we can get away from questioning each other's motives, we can start to get back to a level of collegiality that maybe we can focus on policies. But it is 2026, folks. It is not 2023. It is not 2024. Joe Biden doesn't matter, okay? It's what matters today is what's going on today. What is this budget committee's job? We are not getting to the 3% target we all agreed to a few weeks ago from the gate. And I'd say that we have a lot of work to do, but.
Well, the gentleman is making, some fair and fine remarks, and I have the utmost respect.
Sorry, I went over.
Well, we're over time. I do think that Mr. Smucker's comments were intended to be on record, contrasting on record, not on motive. However that came out, I believe it was about the record, not the motive. But I appreciate your comments. Let's move.
Saying we don't care about something is a personal attack.
Let's go to Chuck Edwards now for 5 minutes, our colleague from North Carolina.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Vought, thanks for being here. Before I get to my questions, I've got to make a number of the committee members here aware, and I want to express my appreciation to you. A number of us had a meeting a few weeks ago, and I expressed my concerns about the velocity of which funding was coming out of FEMA going to Western North Carolina. In that meeting, you invited me to the White House that very afternoon, and I'm really proud and appreciative, and I want the committee members that were there to know that within a number of hours, $173 million was distributed to Western North Carolina. So thank you very much for that. I've got more questions than I'm going to have time, so I'm just going to jump right in. The president's budget currently reduces CBGD funding by $3.3 billion. That type of funding is critical to Western North Carolina, and it's my job representing Western North Carolina to make sure that we've got the resources that we need to rebuild. About $2 billion in CDBG-DR funding has already been allocated to North Carolina. We had a storm of epic proportion, September 27, 2024, that we estimate costs about $60 billion. And yet we've only received about $2 billion in CBGDR funding. Admittedly, the drawdown of that is operating somewhat slowly. But the fact that that the president's budget reduces the CBGD funding by $3.3 billion and cites, and this is probably accurate, that program fails to target communities in need and that it's somewhat of a slush fund. I would just appeal to you and say that any of that funding that comes to Western North Carolina right now is not being used as a slush fund. We've got $60 billion in damage to recover from and only a fraction in CBGDR. And so my question for you is, rather than just cutting that under the pretense that that fund is failing to target communities in need, would the president be open to talking about some ways that we can better target communities in need?
Always open to that kind of conversation. And as you know, there's some bills moving through regarding the authorization of CDBG-DR, of which the disaster recovery part of it is not authorized. So when we talk about the CBDG program, we're talking about that typical formula program that goes to paying sidewalks in Greenwich, Connecticut, which I think is an improper use of federal taxpayer funds. When we're in $39 trillion in debt, I think we need to look very closely at those types of funding programs and to make sure that somewhere in the federal government, people or communities are getting the funds that they need. But we do have issues with that program, particularly the non-disaster part. And if there's an issue with regard to North Carolina not getting its DR, I'm happy to go back and try to figure out where that is.
All right, thank you for that. That's more conversation I think that we need to have, because we have a number of businesses that have been wiped out, a number of homes, schools, local governments that have not been made whole yet. I think we could find a way to direct those funds and
target the specific needs. One other question real quick. And this is regard the Capital Magnet Fund. Those dollars funded outside the appropriations process through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac fee revenue have been transferred to Treasury, but reportedly haven't been apportioned by OMB. CDFIs are one of the most effective tools that we have for increasing affordable housing, especially in rural and hard-to-serve communities like I represent. Can you tell us what is the status of the fiscal year 2026 apportionment for the Capital Magnet Fund, and when can CDFIs expect those resources to be released so they can move forward on affordable housing projects?
Thanks, Congressman. We have released the 25-26 CDFI funds, but I will tell you this is a program that I think needs oversight from Congress. If you look at what these CDFIs were funding, many of them continue to be woke. They continue to be pushing an ideology that is very harmful. I'll just give you a 4.9 for Local Initiative Support Corporation that publishes blogs condemning the level of whiteness in community development. In addition, when a CDFI does a loan, it is exempt from ability to repay requirements. So you're getting a loan on the books that is not necessarily as sound and secure as one that would come from a typical bank. So we have issues with this program. The president proposed to eliminate this program in an EO. It's why you see a reduction in our budget. We eliminate the main program, and then we have a new $100 million program for what we would think of as new rural CDFIs that I think can be more targeted. So I get the question, but that's where we're coming from.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you very much. I'll yield.
I yield 5 minutes to my friend from California, Mr. Panetta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Director, it's good to have you here before the Budget Committee. Although I agree with the Ranking Member, it shouldn't have taken this long. And unfortunately, though, that we've seen is that delay, to me, is one of many examples of the broader disregard by this administration for Congress and for our system of checks and balances. Now, don't get me wrong. Executive authority exists. We get that. We understand that. But it does not extend to the administration unilaterally withholding funding that's been appropriated by Congress. I'm not just saying that. The law mandates it. Impoundments occur when the administration refuses to implement federal expenditures authorized and appropriated by Congress and enacted into law. In fact, there's been 235 years of constitutional interpretation, case law, and statute which have made that clear, that once a law is enacted, the executive branch is not permitted to refuse to execute that law. An impoundment would basically replace the rule of law with the rule of one person. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution clearly gives Congress the power of the person that states that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequences of appropriations made by law. And the Constitution mandates that the president take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Now, as we heard today, and as you know, in 1973, President Nixon attempted to impound billions of dollars of enacted clean water appropriations over the objection of Congress. And as you know, in Train v. the City of New York, the Supreme Court unanimously disagreed with President Nixon. That decision was even relied upon as precedent in the court's 98 decision striking down President Clinton's use of a line-item veto to block certain portions of a spending bill. As you know, Nixon's attempt at impoundment was the basis for the 74 Impoundment Control Act, which banned impoundments. Yet despite that law, despite those Supreme Court rulings, and as you mentioned today, this president, this administration, and you believe that impoundment is within the president's power. Your general counsel argued that nearly all enacted laws are merely just suggestions and guidelines that give the president and the executive branch substantial discretion to follow, alter, or even disregard. Your administration basically asserts that a president has mandate to eliminate spending to balance the budget by any means necessary. The problem with that, though, Director, is that the Constitution of the United States does not have a presidential mandate exception. And when it comes to impoundment, there is no language in the Constitution that makes it optional. If this administration continues to impound our appropriated spending, you are basically eliminating Congress's power of the purse. You are basically cutting off Congress in the budget process. And I think as members of this committee, that is something we should continue to push back on. But since this Congress, especially with the leadership in this Congress, has given up that power and let this happen, the courts, thankfully, have been the bulwark against you and your impoundments and your elimination of programs. Your attempt to lay off CFPB employees got struck down in NTEU versus Vought. The preliminary injunction was granted to stop your attempts to withhold congressionally appropriated funds from the National Endowment for Democracy. The Council for Opportunity in Education versus the Department of Education, there was a preliminary injunction to stop the releasing of federal TRIO funding. In Pasito versus Trump, there was another preliminary injunction to suspend the U.S. Refugee Assistance Program. And in the city of Chicago versus DHS, the administration tried to impound FEMA's Shelter and Services Program, but that was stopped by a court. In the National Council of Nonprofits versus OMB, the administration tried to put a government-wide funding freeze, and that was stopped by the courts. In the National Fair Housing Alliance versus HUD, HUD refused to release Fair Housing Initiatives programs funding, and that was stopped by the courts. Director, given these court decisions, given the Constitution of the United States, given the law of this land, do you still believe in impoundments?
200 years of presidents had the ability to spend less money
Once again,
than Congress
Director,
provided.
do you believe in impoundments?
Of course I believe in impoundments.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
The Supreme Court has never spoken on this issue, by the way. All of what you said is largely not true and heavily nuanced.
In regards to Train versus City of New York.
No, that's not true. It was not on impoundment. It was a textual issue.
And isn't it true that Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution clearly gives Congress the power of the purse?
To set the limit.
Isn't that correct?
To set the limit on what an appropriation should be.
And despite all this, you still believe in impoundments,
We believe
correct?
vitally in the Constitution's ability to make sure that we can't spend a dollar that you haven't appropriated. That is the constitutional provision.
Director, reclaiming my time, once again, that is why I believe this Congress needs to push back. We're not seeing it with this leadership, but come November of this year, the American people are going to make sure that you understand what impoundments are about. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time's expired. I yield 5 minutes to my friend from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the chairman. I thank you, Director Vought, for your appearance here today. I thank you for what you've been doing for the country. And on impoundment, let me just ask you questions so the average American can understand what we're talking about. You're talking about the power of the president to reduce spending where appropriate in certain areas, but not to actually spend additional money, correct?
Absolutely correct.
So we're talking about a ceiling, and Congress says we're going to spend X, and the president says, you know what, maybe, just maybe, somebody ought to be responsibly looking at how we spend money and say that we're not going to spend every single dollar that has been put in that account. Is that roughly what we're saying?
If Congress has given us the charge and says we're going to X billion dollars on nursing facilities across the country, and you give us a number and we can do it less than you have given us, why on earth wouldn't we not spend less? And the American people benefited this for 200 years. And as a result, in 1974, now we have a system where agencies and bureaucracies push the money out the door at the end of the fiscal year. So we have big screen TVs and copy machines in every agency across the federal government trying to make sure that Congress knows that they have spent every last dollar up to that ceiling.
And in fact, has Congress given you any indication or belief that they are willing to constrain spending as a body?
Well, until this last year, where we had the end of fiscal futility, we sent up hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts and reforms in the first Trump administration, all of which were ignored.
But now we've changed course to some degree. And I want to talk to you about trajectory, because trajectory matters. And I think that's what you're getting at in your testimony. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that shifting the direction in order to try to get some sort of fiscal sanity in this country. Is it true or false that the vast majority of the deficit increases out into the, say, even just over the 10-year budget window are coming from Medicare and Social Security?
There are structural entitlements and mandatory programs that are a big mathematical driver of the deficits that we're seeing.
But for Social Security and Medicare, we're talking $2.2 trillion to $4.4 trillion. We're talking about a significant growth in deficits as a result of those programs. Is that a fair statement?
Fair assessment.
Right. My point of bringing that up is None of that is a part of your budget for the most part, correct?
There are no mandatory reforms unless there is a tie to a discretionary proposal.
And in what we tried to accomplish in the big, beautiful bill last summer, where we were able to get reforms to Medicaid, we were able to actually transform policies, get people off of welfare to work, try to stop all of the wasteful spending and the Green New scam subsidies, and create economic growth through tax policy. And none of that were we addressing Social Security or Medicare. Is that correct?
Nothing in this budget addresses, or over the next year, Social Security or Medicare.
Is it not important that what the president has been doing and what this Congress under Republican leadership has been doing to hold discretionary spending roughly flat? Is that roughly true over the last 3 years that we've managed to hold over the last 3 fiscal years, discretionary spending roughly flat?
Yes, but we've actually gone beneath current law spending. In both 25 and 26, we've reduced between $17 billion and then $18 billion in spending.
In significant part because of our work to hold it flat, both in the working Congress and the executive branch, but also with respect to rescissions. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Because of the work and the efforts of the administration to try to constrain that spending. If we're talking about a trajectory shift in this country, is holding discretionary spending flat or at a very low amount of growth important while we also have to go deal with those other issues driving the budget deficits?
It is absolutely critical, and I would argue that's where you have to begin, because that's what Congress has a vote on every single year. And for a long time, I would argue 20 years, Congress did not really focus on in each and every appropriations process on what they could do. We've seen a sea change in that over the last several years.
Is it not an important message for the country that Congress, in dealing with its annual budget that it can actually control, that we show the fiscal discipline of holding that spending flat? And then to that question, we've got a budget before us that has a significant increase in defense spending for the purposes that I think the director has laid out. I don't need to repeat them, that we need to defend our country as a core constitutional duty. That you've then constrained the vast majority of the other departments and agencies and funding in order to try to keep that spending relatively flat as we work out a mix of mandatory and discretionary in defense. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the goal here is to keep that on a low growth trajectory while we see if Congress, in its infinite wisdom, will ever step up to the plate to address Medicare and Social Security, knowing Social Security is scheduled to go bankrupt in 2032. Is that roughly correct?
Well, I think it's important to focus on where this Congress has focused on. And as you know, the president believes that it's important to protect those two programs, Social Security and Medicare. This Congress has gone at it from the right perspective, which is going after fraud, waste and abuse, welfare reform so that we get people back to work. I believe that is the way that we go after and get to a better fiscal situation, is to have those types of reform efforts, of which you were able to do with a very slim Congress.
I think I'm past my time. Just one last quick point. I would just appreciate being able to work with the director, and I know my friend, the chairman, also a Texan, to work. I know Secretary Noem was working with us now. Secretary Mullen no doubt will, to achieve the $10 billion of a refund to the state of Texas and other states because of what we had to endure under the previous administration with open borders and expenditures to our budget. I assume that the director will work with us to achieve that objective.
I'm happy to. We're working on that fund. We want to make sure all of the DHS funds are flowing. I will just say it's very critical that we get DHS funded. We're in this vital moment, it's precarious, where we are trying to pay all DHS employees for a period of time when that has not occurred. And I know that we're moving reconciliation to be able to pay for what the Senate Democrats have not been willing to fund. But we have to get those funds funded so that we can ensure that the allotments that you provided in the One Big Beautiful Bill are able to go out.
I associate myself with the gentleman's comment. Appreciate the response, Mr. Vought. Now yield 5 minutes to Ms. Watson-Coleman of New Jersey.
Thank you. So I was just trying to figure out where could I find a needle large enough to burst the bubble that you guys live in, because you're not living in reality and you're creating a narrative, and just because you say it, you think it's true. And so I've sat up here and I've listened to a whole bunch of explanations that don't in any way, shape, or form relate to reality. I got a couple of questions to ask you, sir. I'm going to start with one that's going to give you a moment to speak, and then I'm going to ask you a series of yes and no's. And when I say yes or no's, I want yes or no's. What would you say right now to the mothers of the kids who died because of your dismantling of U.S. aid? Harvard study says There are more than 100,000 of them. Can you give me a quick response to what you would say
Harvard?
to those mothers? Just don't talk to me about the study. Talk to me about what you would say to the mothers of the children who've died.
Congresswoman, with great respect, I would just contest that the extent to which institutions that benefit from federal largesse put out studies that say that the world has ended, that the world has not in fact ended.
Well, it's going
we
there.
only cut
If you're not gonna answer the
USAID spending
question-
last year to the tune of about $8 billion. There was
Reclaim-
far more that we could have done, Congresswoman.
Reclaiming my time. If a mother came before you who told you that her child died because she didn't have access to health care or medicine that usually would be available because of the kindness of the United States of America, that you and this administration have eliminated, would you have anything of empathy, compassion, and humanity to say to her? Would you say to her, I am sorry, that was a mistake?
I always have empathy for individuals, including those that get improper and false information from the media that pumps this false and ignorant information out to the American people.
You know, I am so tired of hearing false, fraud, and abuse from any of my colleagues and even from you. Because if we wanted to eliminate abuse and fraud, we'd eliminate the President of the United States from the office right now and the rest of the sycophants in his administration that are allowing him to do so many illegal things. So here's my yes or no's. This is about your budget, and this is about your priorities. Do you think that it is more important to fight a war of choice with a country that represented no threat to us, rather than supporting cuts to Economic Development Administration, to K-12 programs, to community service block grants, to National Institute of Health, to the TSA, and let me speak something about the TSA. Anytime you wanted to spend money to pay DHS, you could, because this president thinks he's a king and can do what he wants to do. And if he wanted to pay those DHS workers, he could have, because he finds money to do everything else he wants to do. What about the money that goes to homeless assistance programs? That's $393 million, or $60 million for fair housing, or eliminating or cutting Job Corps to the point that it's of no help to getting people on the right direction. And even the money for community development financial institutions. Sir, do you think that those programs which address the quality of life, the opportunity of life, the healthiness of the people in this country, including their access to health care, is less important than fighting a frickin' war across the world that never, ever, ever had to be started? Yes or no is all I want.
It's not a war of choice.
Just say yes or no.
It's not a war of choice.
I don't care what
It's
you
an
think it
important
is. I
national
ask you for
security
the
objective.
Yes or no. That's all I want from you.
It is an important national security objective that Iran not.
That is another piece of the bubble that you live in. And that's another part of the information that you all share to create a narrative that has nothing to do with reality. And the people of this country are showing you, location by location, state by state, county by county, and city by city, that they don't believe you all anymore. And let me talk to you a little bit with my 3 minutes or 3 seconds about the cost of living. You keep talking about what you saved here and what you saved there and how you saved this one and how you are more diligent in your savings. Well, the people in this country, they don't feel it with their health care. They don't feel it with the gas they got to put in their cars. They don't feel it when they go to the grocery store. They don't feel it when they try to avoid evictions. They don't feel that you all have stood up to any of your promises, that this is an unfortunately monetizing, lying, corrupt administration.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
I yield my time.
We're now going to yield 5 minutes with Mr. Andrew Clyde from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Vought, for testifying before us today. Apologize for the abuse you've had to take from the other side. President Trump's fiscal year 2027 budget builds on last year's progress to cut wasteful spending, promote economic growth, and invest in our armed forces to advance his Peace Through Strength agenda, which I fully support. In fiscal year 26, congressional Republicans delivered 12 more fiscally responsible appropriation bills, avoiding a bloated omnibus, while reducing overall discretionary spending by approximately $1 billion and non-defense discretionary spending by about $18 billion. Director Vought, with your help and hard work, we also enacted the first successful rescissions package since really 1999, cutting nearly $9 billion in wasteful spending, including cutting nearly $4 million that was scheduled to be used to promote LGBT democracy initiatives in the Western Balkans, cutting nearly $40 million for low-emission development in West Africa, and cutting nearly $25 billion scheduled for climate resilience programs in Honduras. Think about all those millions of taxpayer dollars that have been saved by and large part due to the incredible work of you, Director Vought, and of your staff, that some of them are here, and so thank you very much for your hard work as well. Building on that progress, President Trump's FY27 budget continues to reduce wasteful spending, right-size bloated bureaucracies, and put the federal government on a more sustainable fiscal path. It cuts non-defense spending by $72 billion, roughly 10%, while continuing to invest in veterans, seniors, law enforcement, and farmers. These savings are achieved by continuing President Trump's promise to rid the government of woke and wasteful spending, end weaponization of the federal government, and terminate the Green New Scam. So, Director Vought, first, with the federal debt exceeding $39 trillion, how does the rising cost of debt service threaten the long-term viability of federal health programs, veterans benefits, and other critical benefits for seniors, farmers, and other vulnerable populations?
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your leadership, not just within this Congress, but also within the Appropriations Committee on this. When you spend $1 trillion in interest costs every year, that, for the first time, has exceeded the national defense of this country. That should be a great warning light that we can't afford the government that we had. And just to give you a perspective, when I left office the first time, we were somewhere in the neighborhood of about $350 billion in interest costs. And so you saw that just escalate in just 4 short years. So that is something we can't afford, and it will eventually crowd out other priorities. And it means that, you know, I got asked about whether we could adjust our spending proposal to meet this need or that. Our margin is reduced when we have interest costs at that level. And that's why it's so important to get a handle on it. And I appreciate the work that this Congress has done in particular in that vein.
Well, we will continue trying to make us as fiscally responsible as possible. Within the president's budget, I noticed something new, a new initiative focused on the Second Amendment. $1.4 million to a new office within the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division dedicated to protecting the Second Amendment from unlawful infringement. I say finally, and thank you. We are beginning to comply with our Declaration of Independence regarding the protection of unalienable rights endowed by our Creator. And it goes on to say, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. That means our government is supposed to secure the rights endowed by the Creator. And this, finally, we have an office to secure one of the most incredible rights that we have, and that is the right to keep and bear arms, the Second Amendment of our United States Constitution. So my question to you is, how do we best ensure that this office is aggressive in protecting the Second Amendment and will never allow it to become an office of gun control infringing on this critical constitutional right?
Well, thanks for the question. I think part of that is to trust the team that the president has that envisioned this office, and then to continue to make sure that we give progress reports to the Appropriations Committee for those who have a great interest in this area, and to make sure that over the long haul, that culture does not become completely reversed to that what it was set up to do.
Would it help if we codified some of that?
I think that would be a great idea, yeah.
Okay, all right, I'll work on it. Thank you.
Yep.
And I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and now yield to Ms. Ballant from Vermont, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Vought, it's good to finally see you before the House Budget Committee. Mr. Vought, you lead the Office of Management and Budget. You're one of the architects of Project 2025, and OMB is a powerful agency that's at the center of President Trump's illegal refusal to spend federal money. Mr. Vought, I want to go over your political weaponization of this agency against the American people, and specifically against those states that voted primarily for Democrats. Yes or no, Mr. Vought, a federal judge found that you terminated $7.6 billion in clean energy grants based on whether the recipient lived in a blue state. Yes or no?
I don't recall what that judge said, but we have not made the determinations based on whether the state is...
In fact, Mr. Vought, on January 12th, 2026, U.S. Judge Amit Mehta said, quote, defendants, meaning you, Mr. Vought, freely admit that they made grant determination decisions primarily, if not exclusively, based on whether the awardee resided in a state whose citizens voted for President Trump in 2024. Mr. Vought, yes or no? Federal judges said OMB's freeze of $10 billion in child care and family assistance funding, quote, appeared designed to punish communities that the administration agreed with. Yes or no? Was that something that federal judges said about you and your leadership?
I think the judge's characterization is getting at the degree to which we are focused on states that we think are mismanaged.
Okay, that is not in fact the case. In fact, U.S. District Judge Trina Thompson found the administration broke the law and froze funds as a politically motivated move disguised as fraud prevention. So your characterization actually is false. Other courts have said that withholding congressionally approved funding is, quote, vindictive and unlawful. Courts have found that freezing funds create, quote, irreparable harm against the American people. And the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, the watchdog agency that investigates how federal agencies spend taxpayer dollars, has reported that you broke the law multiple times, and they have said that you have refused to spend money that was dedicated for Americans. The Constitution gives Congress the power to spend money and not the president. Mr. Vought, your actions clearly show that you want to cut federal funds from anyone who didn't vote for Donald Trump. Are you trying to get revenge on states that did not vote for your boss?
No, of course not. What's interesting about the question is that Joe Biden withheld.
Oh, for goodness sakes, can we please bring it back to my question? It was a yes or no question. Are you trying to get revenge against blue states because they did not support the president? Courts have said that, in fact, you did do that. That, in fact, you are being vindictive. In fact, you are punishing because of political persuasions. It's not members of Congress who suffer when you do an end run around Congress. That's not what I'm angry about. It's not about you taking the power away from us. It's that it's their money. It's their power. Of the people, by the people, and for the people. The House is closest to the people. So when you do an end run around Congress, you're taking Americans' power. I want to move on now to wasteful government spending, particularly the $350 billion set aside for this, yes, war of choice against Iran, included in this president's budget. His budget asked for a shocking surge in Pentagon spending, up to $1.5 trillion. We have never in the history of this country seen spending like this, paid for by slashing healthcare, education, and housing. Donald Trump has said, as my colleagues have said earlier, we're fighting wars here. We can't take care of daycare. Mr. Vought, yes or no, is $350 billion for the war in Iran lowering costs for Americans? Those Americans who ask us in every single town hall why they can't afford to live in this country. Is the war lowering costs for Americans?
It is certainly not defunding childcare. We fully fund childcare in this budget.
Is it lowering costs for the American people?
But doesn't that get at the premise of your question?
You can find money for illegal wars in Iran. You can find money for all the pet projects of this administration, and yet we can't find money to alleviate the costs of food and housing
fully
and gas
funded-
on the home front. But according to
Fully
you,
funded childcare, fully funded Head Start.
Mr. Vogt, with the money that is set aside in this budget, the additional funding for the war in Iran, $350 billion, we could fund the ACA tax credits for 10 years, for a decade. And I can tell you what my constituents want to know. How is it that we can continue to spend money on foreign wars and yet we cannot find a solution to the fact that people can't afford health care? And again, in closing, I just want to say again, we're not so angry because you're taking our power. We're angry because you are taking the people's power. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. If the gentleman wants to respond.
I would just say this president has been a person who has campaigned and led for peace and against endless wars.
So is it peace through war? Is that where we are right now?
Ms.
Peace
Fallon,
through war?
I'm giving our witness
the
time to
president-
respond to your question, and then I'm going to
president-
yield 5 minutes to Mr. Estes. So finish the response uninterrupted, and then let's go to Mr.
The
Estes.
president has also been equally clear that he is not going to allow a nuclear Iran. He is not going to allow them to have nuclear weapons. He is not going to allow them to have missiles and a Navy that impacts our national security. And so he is doing what is necessary to keep us safe while at the same trying to pursue diplomacy so that we can get out of wars and lower those costs over time.
I thank the gentleman. Yield 5 minutes to Mr. Estes from Kansas.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Vought, for being here at the Budget Committee to talk about the administration's priority and fiscal roadmap for the coming year. And I'll just start, deviate a little bit from my original remarks in terms of saying thank you for working to make the world safer against the nuclear Iran. I mean, they've spent 47 years chanting death to America and threatening nuclear reaction against so much of the world, not just the United States. And we need to make sure that bad actors in the world are contained. You know, we're at a critical moment in our nation's history. You know, as we look forward to celebrating the 250th anniversary of America, we need to ensure that the economic foundation that we leave for the next generation is one of stability and not crushing debt for families nationwide and for hardworking people in my district. I'm encouraged to see that this budget request prioritizes cutting wasteful spending and rooting out the kind of fraud that has plagued federal spending for so long. Earlier this year, I joined a group of bipartisan members to introduce House Resolution 981, the 3% resolution. Our objective is simple: to reduce the federal deficit to 3% of the GDP or lower within 5 years. Currently, our deficit is double that benchmark. I'm interested as we talk through this and talking about how some of your thoughts on your fiscal 27 budget request helps to get us towards that point. Just a quick overview of my district in Kansas, the 4th Congressional District. I mean, we're proudly known in Wichita as the air capital of the world. We currently make 35% of all general aviation aircraft in the United States and are home to more than 450 aerospace suppliers. Working family tax cuts has been great jet fuel to help support and grow our economy in terms of making sure that we restore immediate R&D expensing and capital expenditures to help invest in the future. When we keep taxes low for workers and provide full expensing for factories, we're ensuring that high-paying, high-tech jobs help maintain America's gold standard for global aviation. Beyond aerospace, the tax savings have amounted to a Kansas family saving acquiring about between $3,400 and $6,100 in inflation-adjusted wages over the next 4 years. And focusing on so many good policies and helping make sure businesses like the small businesses take advantage of the 199A deduction. You know, as we focus on how do we make sure Main Street succeeds in America, whether it's in Wichita or Newton or Winfield or so many other communities across my district. And then just in a general comment, you know, the federal government lost $162 billion in improper payments in fiscal year 2024. And we can't ask Kansas to pay more to government that's going to lose billions of dollars. Just in talking a little bit about, you've talked about so many things already. The working family tax cut contained many healthcare provisions to eliminate some of that waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare and Obamacare, ensuring that federal subsidies for healthcare go to those who are intended. Are there further reforms that Congress should consider to help reduce fraud throughout the healthcare system?
Potentially. We're working on that right now. One of the activities of the task force that we have for fraud is not just to surge resources to make sure people are prosecuted, but to really do a review of whether agencies have enough resources to do the fraud hunting, but also are there things that make it impossible for you to get at fraud? For instance, a lot of times when we ask states for their rolls, we can't get it. And so what are your tools to withhold funding under the law, mandatory programs, until they give you those rolls? Those are the kinds of things that we are likely to come to you after we get through this next reconciliation package as it pertains to ways to combat fraud.
Yeah, which is a good point, because the Democrat governor of my state actually has not been forthright in helping the federal government make sure that there's not waste, fraud, and abuse in some of those programs for that. As mentioned earlier, the U.S. debt exceeds $39 trillion, and you talked earlier about the cost of servicing that debt, paying over the $1 trillion in interest. And are there some specific examples or other areas as healthcare programs that are maybe crowded out because we do not have the money because of the interest cost?
Well, I think the extent to which the crowd out will occur with interest payments and servicing the debt is ultimately the crisis in front of us. I mean, we've been able to absorb the cost of our interest payments, but we actually have to treat this as the crisis that it is. And that's one of the reasons that this administration has been so dogged to support and champion reforms, to make changes to how we do things, to at times think differently about our executive tools to control spending for the last 50 years. Because we have a problem, and we can't just continue to point at the problem, point at the interest cost, point at the deficit, and just acknowledge that it's never going to be fixed. That's just not the way the president operates with regard to wanting to be in charge of solutions on these big problems facing the country.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for your effort to cut out the bloated spending and the waste. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and I've lost my list to yield to Ms. Jayapal, my classmate from the great state of Washington, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Vought. Despite President Trump's promise to lower prices on day one, consumer sentiment plummeted to its lowest level on record last week. Gas prices are at a record high. In Seattle, diesel is now over $7, and families are feeling this every time they go to the grocery store. Meanwhile, fraud reports have only gone up, and efforts to hold big corporations